Some might describe Resident Evil 5 as bad, terrible, a waste of time. Some might say it's good, but not really a Resident Evil game. Some might even have fond memories of this game, and hey, maybe there's a few who've never played it who don't really know which way to swing. The thing is, I think all of these things are right. Resident Evil 5, like most of these games, and well, games in general, had some ups and downs in production. A lot of rewrites, delay in production, and a new console cycle were all things that weighed pretty heavily on Capcom. And you add in the focus that was online gaming around this time, and things can be a bit fuzzy. They did know a few things though. This was always going to be a story about partnership, and oh boy, that's probably the word of the day. And this was a story between Chris and Wesker, and how it all ends. So Resident Evil 5 stars Chris Redfield and his wisecracking sidekick, Sheva Alimony.
My parents were involved in an accident caused by a pharmaceutical company when I was young.
Umbrella?
Yes.
Sheva, you're so funny. Chris and Sheva have this cross-country trip because they found a clue linking a treasure to the Declaration of Independence, but when Wesker betrays him, Chris has a race to get the document ahead of his so-called colleague. What do you mean that's not Nick Cage? Resident Evil 5 stars Chris Redfield, who's looking pretty juice, and is it just me or is it a little hot in here? It's probably just the details, because Resident Evil 5 still looks pretty good. There's a few moments where its age shows a little, but overall, it's still a good looking game, and Chris is hot. Speaking of juiced, that's probably the right word to describe this game. Let's break it down like this. Resident Evil 4 was good. People like that game, right? What's that? You guys really like the opening village? Well, bam, here's that with even more enemies. Oh, you like the Chainsaw Man, huh? That scared you a little. Got the blood flowing, didn't it? Well, bam, here's this guy who's worth like 2 Chainsaw Mans. The shotgun was a pretty good second gun, wasn't it? We're gonna give you another good gun. Bam, here's this little Uzi, so enemies can go like this. All joking aside, I really do think this summarizes RE5. At its core, it's a summer blockbuster. It's big, loud, and explosions everywhere with a bit of heart here and there. It starts as this small investigation and it turns into an end-of-the-world scenario. Chris Redfield is now a member of the BSAA, an organization that takes down bioterrorists, so you know Chris was first in line to join. Well, there's a black market deal going down, and the leading man is a man named Irving who is passing around the main virus of this game. Ouroboros. It's fine, by the way. Everyone's gonna say it differently anyways.
Ouroboros. The Ouroboros.
The Ouroboros Project.
Ouroboros is...
You've spent so long trying to track down Ouroboros.
I have Ouroboros.
Euroboscos.
Which everyone thought was folklore, but it's real. So Chris is here to join with the main squad and put an end to this. The American way. With his gun. Chris is also a very troubled man, having doubts if this is all worth it, what he's fighting for, and even having PTSD to the word partner.
That's why I'm your partner. Help put them at ease.
I'm sure you'll do just fine. Partner.
Jill is dead. Things get a little crazy in the town square, Kirk comes in to help out a little, and then we have to meet up with the Alpha team. On our way en route, we run into this blonde who's in dire need of help, so we help her out. With our gun. Arriving to the location of Alpha team, and they're all dead.
Something attacked us. Irving. He got away. It was a setup. A setup? What is this?
That's a hard drive, Chris. Now, Resident Evil is a horror franchise, and this is the 5th entry, but Resident Evil 5 isn't scary. And most probably wouldn't even classify this game as a horror game, but it does have some pretty solid horror assets. I think the big thing that really works against it is movement. Stay with me here. There's a lot of horror scenes like blood splatters, dead bodies, creepy looking hallways, but moving Chris or Sheva around feels very floaty or actiony. Most times you're also running quickly through the scenery, so this atmosphere doesn't really set in, and with the added benefit of co-op, it's really hard to nail a creepy tone. Not to mention if you were to play this game in a local split screen mode like I'm sure some of you did, a lot of details are mostly lost. Resident Evil 4 obviously tried to use big mobs as a way to overwhelm the player in a sense, and that same effect can't really be added here because you have somebody along for the ride. At least you should. Co-op in horror is just a tough thing to nail generally. The one thing that still sticks though, and is always a pleasure to see, is the body horror on display. Capcom just don't miss. And this next boss is good visually, but mechanically, like a lot of these boss fights in this game, is gimmicky. This is our first run-in with Ouroboros, which is this giant tentacle looking thing that takes over the host's body, or bodies. Guns have zero effect on it. You can shoot off parts of the body, but it'll just grow back, so the way to deal with it is fire. Toast it up a little and it'll die. This game hammers home a very 50-50 partnership, if you would. One player can't just solo carry the game, at least not all of it, as one player should lure the creature into the pit so the other player can lock the door and burn it. This is just one of the many co-op situations this game does. Chris and Sheva arrive at the garage and upload that data the dying guy gave them and find out they still have to continue hunting for Irving. And that would be the end of chapter 1. You know how everyone liked the merchant in RE4? Well, now you just have a basic menu to buy, sell, and organize things. On one hand, I get it. It's a lot easier to have this menu for both players, and not have to wait for one person to talk to the merchant and do their thing first, and then be able to do your thing afterwards. But the merchant brought some personality to the game, which this game is kind of lacking on that end. Everything is played dead serious, which is fine. Chris isn't Leon, but Resident Evil games have always been a bit cheesy, so some fun here would have been nice. Not you. Inventory is also more concise. Both players only have 9 slots, but they did add quick slots which are assigned to up, down, left, and right on the D-pad, allowing you to quickly swap between weapons or whatever you have there, making combat have this nice flow and never really breaking it. I know I made a big point about co-op, but for the remainder of this video, everything was done solo. I couldn't really find someone to play through this game with me, as my usual playthrough partner Timmy is stuck in Vegas at blackjack tables surrounded by—
Let's go, Smithers. Smithers?
We're running deeper into the area, going through these very tight corridors, seeing more of the town, and getting a view of the ocean, as well as what seems to be a market area for a big set piece. Running into tougher enemies like this big guy, Chainsaw Man again, and I think the detail in these environments are pretty good for the most part. It has this rundown feel, almost like a ghost town. Enemies feel very mob-like they're hunting for you and don't have a thought of their own, while compared to RE4, where it felt like you were just somewhere you weren't supposed to be. Our buddy Kirk gets taken down by some foreshadowing bat BOWs, and we head over to the location of the crash. Some of you might remember the QuickTime events of this game being annoying. If I'm not mistaken, and I'm not going to search it up so you can just call me on the wrong info, but the higher the difficulty, the less time you get to press the buttons, I believe. However, with the gold edition of Resident Evil 5, there's an option to turn it off. Look, I'm already playing with AI Sheva, I'm not doing QTEs too. I did my time. Chris and Sheva handle as much as they can until they eventually get saved by the goat of supporting characters. I don't know who this guy is. I'm talking about Josh. I don't know if he has a last name, but I like this guy. Josh is a part of Delta Team and found out that according to the hard drive, Irvin is somewhere in the mining area. We say hi to a couple of doggos and take a minecart down to the lower section. Now, I want you to be truthful here. How many of you guys were made to hold a light down here? And don't lie, Josh wouldn't like it. This game really loves separating the players, but only for a little. Very rarely is it a long-term separation. Usually it's one holds the door open for the other to get through and look for a way to open the door on that side. Exiting the mines, we'll come across a pretty sunset and Irving, who strikes a strong resemblance to Bruce from Dead Aim.
Wow, perceptive, aren't ya?
It's an uncanny resemblance. The masked lady comes on in and eventually saves Irving from Chris and Sheva, but we find some clues to where they're heading to next.
The oil field. That's in the marshlands.
Then we're left to this big set piece of climbing up this mountain trail that starts with sniping a guy off a turret and tossing Sheva up the mountain, who's supposed to cover us, but we literally just hit a turn and she's right next to us. So yeah, I don't know about that one. At the end of the area is another boss fight, this time with a giant mutated bat. This game takes place in Africa, where lions are, elephants, even hippos, but we're gonna fight a bat. Okay. Fair enough. I do like that the bat is armored and has a weak spot under its tail that's all fleshy. There's only a few spots the landmines come in handy, but they're perfectly utilized for this fight. Chris does get this cool final shot though. And then our Uber is here to pick us up. I just mentioned Africa, and obviously something that's well known is the savannah, so this game decides to use that setting with an on-rails experience. It's bad. I don't like this part at all. It's cool to see the game slowly transition from day to sundown into night eventually, but this segment of shooting things is rough solo. Sheva doesn't really hold her weight, you can't heal, the camera is really tight, so when enemies come from the side, it makes it hard to shoot them, but the boss fight at the end is okay. When we arrive back at the base, it's been wiped, and setting wise, it looks cool. Everyone's dead, bodies are everywhere, it's night, but we don't get to experience any of that because it's all on rails still. The giant here though, who mind you is the best designed one by far, I mean he has a belt of his dead enemies. That's cool. They could have done so much more with this fight. Instead, it's just Blue Ball the boss. He winds up attack like, I'm gonna kick you, oh wait, you shot me fast enough, I'm gonna hit you to stop him again. Then his little plagas come out, pop them all, and shoot his back. That's all there is to it. At the end of the fight though, we do have this nice moment between Chris and Sheva. All these dead comrades that Sheva knew is really taking a toll on her, and Chris is like, you can still quit, it's fine. But he has to see it through because the real reason he's chasing this lead is because someone sent him a picture that Jill is still alive. And he owes it to her. This moment just reinforces Chris and Sheva as partners until the end. It's nice.
We are partners. To the end. Now let's get moving.
Copy that.
Chapter 3 brings us to the Marshlands, where the game starts to show some bloat in my opinion. But before we get into any real gameplay stuff, Chris and Sheva both decide to open up about their past here. Sheva with her parents, and Chris finally tells us what happened with Jill. They had intel on Spencer and his location, and figured they might be able to find Wesker through him. Well, lucky for these two, Wesker decided to show up himself and make it a family reunion. Cue the music! Copyright hiya! Wesker isn't the only one with combos. After all, Jill was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 first. So Jill hits him with a super and both are presumed dead. But maybe just Jill was, cause Wesker just doesn't die. I mean, look at all the shit he does. After our pair does some storytelling, you're left to explore the marshlands via boat. This is like if you took the boat section in RE4 and expanded it, which is kind of funny because they do the same exact thing in the RE4 remake. Driving around to different locations to pick up key items, to open up the big door, it's just not very interesting in its execution. I do like the enemies of this area though, feeling way more tribe-like, but the collectathon on the other hand is pretty basic. This game specifically uses this formula a lot, needing 2 or 3 items to open up the door. We do have one part where we can't use the boat, so we have to navigate the area by foot, which is a nice switch up, and they even add alligators, so that's cool. But it's just missing something. It doesn't feel all that well thought out. It feels like the game just wants to keep moving quickly and not really stick around too long in one area. Same with the next section, as we head deeper into the village, getting closer to the oil field. This is our next big set piece where spike traps are littered around and even a new enemy. It's a mini boss type, so like the Chainsaw Man, and he's definitely a little freaky guy, or tall freaky guy. Very long limbs and sporting a metal mask, so headshots are out of the equation. Again, this is a very short-lived section, but there is some story here even if it's easy to miss. There's a journal entry, and it's actually quite sad, going on about how outside men started giving the villagers a cure because there was a quote-unquote sickness going around. Well, the children of the village ended up sick first, and then the women, hence why we only see men here. Then the note slowly goes from a man asking questions and loving his village into descent of bloodlust. Tragic stuff. Before reaching the oil field, we'll come across a camp that was set up by Tricell. They help fund the BSAA, and get this, it's another pharmaceutical company. Some things never change. Up ahead is the oil field itself, and this is another giant action set piece that has 0 breaks. It starts with a section that requires you to turn some valves to shut off the fire, throwing hordes of enemies and chainsaw men at you, into quickly reunite with Josh, who is just the goat of opening doors, so we have to cover his back while he gets them open. Which then turns into an escape/chase as we find a way to catch up to Irving again, so, you know, more boats. And this part of the chapter, I kind of like. This feels like the equivalent to the on-rail section that was done earlier, except we have full control. Well, kind of full control. Stopping every now and then to get the doors open to pass, and I think this is Resident Evil 5 at its best. It's just chaotic enough that you very much feel like you're in an action movie, but not overtly so, to the point of frustration, because there is a spot where it can be frustrating. Well, we finally catch up to Irving, and I love how this guy is a high-value target, but he just has a single man operating a turret. Good stuff. Irving is such a weird character, because like I said, everything in this game is played straight, except him.
You're making me look bad.
He feels like a bench player who is getting some time on the court because the stars need to break. I do like that the boss fight is basically the Salazar fight. It even looks like the same creature, except, well, Irving looks a lot more deformed, and that's saying something. But again, the body horror here is really good, and also the fight itself isn't too bad. It starts as your typical shoot the glowing parts to do damage and turns into the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but that's not a knock, because it's all in character. Irving doesn't strike me as the smartest guy in the room, so when he does this during his boss phase where he reveals himself, aka the weak spot, over and over, I'm like, yeah, that's something he would do. He does have some dying words about how we'll find out the truth up ahead, and he's kind of right. This is also the last time we're going to be seeing Josh for a while, and I'm not memeing or being sarcastic when I call Josh the GOAT. I do like this guy. He gives off older brother vibes, at least to Sheva. And it's nice to see more survivors during these games, even if Capcom has a roster of cool characters they never use again. Woody and Buzz are just too reliable, I guess. Now that we arrived to the caves, it's time to find out the truth, and this is probably the most Indiana Jones part of the game, or National Treasure if you would. A giant underground city filled with treasure, monuments, creatures, and traps, even the big ball ones. It's a place that feels forgotten to time, and a pretty scenery that feels like something important is waiting for us when we reach the end. I don't think it's going to be the Declaration of Independence though. Or bees.
Oh, no, not the bees! Not the bees! Ah!
There's two main sections you navigate through, the first being this room with colored statues that have chains we can pull, which change the layout of the room, and eventually a staircase to the exit. And the second is a temple looking area that has glowing laser beams that scorch the walkways. And while that seems cool, you're really just collecting 3 emblems again to open the main path up. I do like that they keep the sun theme going though, as once inside we have this light puzzle room. No pun intended, it really is light. Because on the surface level, this is really cool, having to turn mirrors to get the light flowing in the right path. It reminds me a lot of Zelda, but the first 2 rooms you really just turn a single mirror and that's it. Really. This might just be a single player thing because these rays will one-hit kill you, so the idea is to work together with your partner and make sure you're not hitting each other, or one player can stand up on the higher level and just let the other do the work. For all the mandatory co-op things they've done so far, this one felt like a no-brainer to have both players have to do something. I guess maybe players got frustrated in a playtest or something. The very last one is kind of cheeky though, and plays into the fact that the 2 were pretty easy. Because if you did it solo, you might end up in this situation where you have the light turn correctly, but you're stuck. All it requires is moving the other mirror, but having this mirror set up so once you turn it, it'll hit it directly. Again, nothing crazy, but cheeky. That's the first and only puzzle of the game. Now we can finally find out the truth, and I think the build up to this moment is great, even if we don't know it yet. Getting this wide shot of this giant room with sunlight bearing down on these plants is great, even if you don't know what it is, but it feels important. There's also some remnants of Umbrella here, which is a nice touch, and speaking of Umbrella...
Drugs are bad. You shouldn't do drugs. If you do them, you're bad. Because drugs are bad, okay? It's a bad thing to do drugs, so don't be bad.
Technically, I should go over this after the next section of the game, but this should be fine. That flower is known as Stairway of the Sun. The Nidipaya tribe believed it to be sacred, and they themselves were already a hidden group of people, making the existence of this flower barely known. As for the flower itself, well, it's incredibly toxic, but they believed if you were to withstand it, you would be seen as king. This led to many trials for that name, with the final being the consumption of the flower. The mythology is cool and all, but how does this tie in with the overall Resident Evil lore? Well, a man named Henry Travis traveled throughout Africa and made a book about it, and he just happened to be one of the only outsiders accepted into this underground civilization, and happened to come across a flower which he detailed in his book. When his book was released, every scientist discredited his findings. Naturally, that led Henry to depression because this wasn't just some book he wrote, it was a 35-year-long journey and he would soon pass after. Now, one man with a lot of money found this interesting and decided to retrace Henry's steps throughout Africa in hopes to find said flower. That man was Oswald E. Spencer, and he would find that flower, which would later lead to discover the Progenerator virus, the base of every virus in the Resident Evil universe so far. While the overarching plot of Resident Evil 5 is a bit half-baked, there's a lot of solid lore details here that really add to previous games. Anyway, thank you for coming to the lore section of this video. With the lore established, the next section of the game is all about the Forgotten Labs, which is a bright spot because these last chapters are pretty bad. So it's nice to have something good for a change, and to do that, they're bringing back an old friend. And I think this frustrates me because it's not like they can't do a good slow burn. It just took almost the entire game to get to that point. Going down these old lab corridors, seeing blood and scratches everywhere alongside animals being caged sets a good tone. And when the Lickers finally do show up, they're not scary by any means, but they are dangerous. They hit hard and have probably the strongest grab of the game. Then you get this section with just a room full of them, and the only thing separating you is glass. You have to break down a door, which obviously alerts them, but they made a good decision here where you can't just run away from them. You have to wait for an elevator to arrive and hold off until it gets here. It's short and sweet to the point and really brings Lickers back to being dangerous. It's well done. When we get to the elevator, I can't help but feel like this is improbable. Like, do you see how wide and big this place is, especially when you compare it to those dingy labs we were just in? And I know there's a memo that talks about expanding the place, but damn. Chris does some Googling, finding Jill's pod, and I'm pretty sure that's her pod. It was made for her. However, we can't crawl into it because we get interrupted by our next boss fight, which is completely random. I know I mentioned the bat being a weird boss, but at least it kind of makes sense, because you have those flying enemies that kind of look like a baby version of the bat, making it kind of add up. This is just a giant spider, because why not? The fight is fine. The spider is armored, so you have to shoot the fleshy parts of the limb to stun it, and then pop a grenade in its mouth, which does create a gnarly visual of what I assume is its brain slowly showing. I do think it's a waste to have all this open space and not have it crawl around, but maybe they were just trying to help out the arachnophobes out. The lady from earlier pops over and pays a visit, who ends up being Excella, the regional director of Tricell's Africa division. And if the motto of our heroes is partner, then the motto for the villains is you'll find out the truth.
All your answers await ahead, Chris. In that cave.
Oh, you'll find out soon enough.
The game gave us one spooky part. Spooky. So now it's time to go back to action, but this is where the series commits the cardinal sin. Resident Evil 4 went a bit far with the minigun guy, but it was the end of the game, it was Sadler's Army, fine. There was turrets, which this game has too, but then you have enemies with AK-47s. You also have a wall covering mechanic, and we go from feeling like a more action RE4 type game to full-on generic third-person shooter. And RE5 doesn't understand why those games work. See, most of those games you have infinite health, well, so long as you're not being shot at. Halo, you do have a health bar, but also have a shield that regenerates. Gears of War, as long as you're taking cover, you can heal back up. This game has just a health bar, and we heal by herbs in the spray can. Not to mention, gunshots do a lot of damage, and even cause a knockback if shot enough. And depending on your difficulty, these sections can be very annoying. We haven't reached the pinnacle though, but we are close. I think this is still the labs, despite giving more of a factory setting, but I do like that there's this bug type of enemies who are just annoying to deal with, but their stacks remind me of Alien, and I've been watching all those movies, so maybe just a in kind of moment kind of thing. Anyways, we run into Excella again alongside our bird friend and round 2 of Ouroboros. You know, I never knew why people hated AI Sheva. I heard a lot of jokes, and I read some stuff, but I figured it was people being hyperbole. But I understand now. This fight opened my eyes. Well, I hate this fight in general, if I'm being honest here. One reason is because the previous fight with this thing didn't establish that it has a weak point. But here you get a lot of fire stuff, which should help with the fight here, but it feels useless. Because the main key to this fight is to blow it up with fire, so grenade or the explosive barrels, and then use the flamethrower they give you to stun lock him so your partner can shoot the balls. Well, my partner is the rock Patrick throws into the race, because if you have her use a flamethrower, she will just use it until it runs out. So it's either prep a canister and then let her go to town, or do it yourself and have her shoot the balls and pray. Just pray. But in the PC version, you can't just swap weapons to Sheva. So if you're like me and you give Sheva just a sniper rifle and the machine gun from earlier, well, hey, she takes a long time because she decides to shoot with her machine gun. By single bullet. Okay, so then just die. Go to the shop, set her up, but then sometimes, this warm thing likes to magically walk over a barrel and not pick it up. So why can't we just kill this thing with a flamethrower? Why do we have to be so cute and make this another co-op moment? Whatever. We get more cover shooter stuff, but with rocket launchers now, then head to another elevator where the enemies are assholes and stop the elevator and just stare at us until we kill them. You know what I want to do? I want to keep talking about bad things, because Resident Evil 5 keeps hitting you with them over and over and over again. The liquor section is the biggest cheat of the game. So you have to throw Sheva up or yourself and make your way to the other side to hop down into the room and release the bridge. But after walking so far, you'll trigger some cutscenes and liquors will start to spawn, and you're supposed to cover your partner as they push this block out of the way. And ideally, you could just hop, press a switch and run off, but I'm a stubborn guy. I wanted to kill every single one of them. So hey, maybe this is just a me thing, but if you have a hateful experience of this section, let me know. You know, bonding. There's just so many. But I feel like I remember killing all of them last time. Well, it got rough. I even went ahead and tried a few strategies, one by placing mines everywhere that a single liquor managed to use all by himself, and the second was to kill each set of liquors as they spawned by going up myself. This is where the section cheats. It doesn't matter if you do that, because by the end, you'll still be swarmed. So I just said forget it and moved on, only to be frustrated more. So, Wesker, right? Big bad of the franchise and who this game is supposed to be about, finally shows himself. With only one chapter of the game left. Better late than never. Jill is also still alive, shocker, and it's time for a 2-on-2. This is the most blatant waste of time I've ever scene, because you can't fight back here. This game faces the problem that Wesker is too OP. There is a well done gimmick fight coming up later, but this and the DLC don't know how to do a fight with Wesker. Since he's so strong, the best course of action is to run. Wesker even says he only has so much time he can spend on us. When playing with somebody, you obviously have two brains. And when this fight breaks into the second phase, when you're supposed to hide, Sheva has the bright idea. Chris will deal with Wesker, while she deals with Jill. That means Sheva will actively go out and look for Jill. And sometimes Wesker's there too, and look, 2-on-1, it's just not fair. So more than likely, Sheva's gonna die most of the time, and well, if she does, and she will, trust me, and you're on the other side of her, completely opposite, that means restarting the fights. The solution is to sit in the corner and spam the button that calls her over until the fight is done. Fun. Wesker will leave after some time passes, leaving just Jill, who's being controlled via a red pendant thing in her chest, leaving us to get it off her. I'm sure a lot of you try to shoot it off her, and killed her. Lucky me, the AI has aimbot, making it fairly easy. Jill is finally rescued and comes to her senses. She does have this one line that I think is really good though.
I couldn't control my actions. Oh my god, I was still aware.
This is Chris's moment. We've been chasing after our ghost partner this entire game, and here she is. We won't see Jill until the ending of the game. I get it, and I'm happy to a degree that they're letting Sheva have her moment still, because they could have easily just have Jill become the playable partner from this point on. But the fact that they leave Jill here so Chris can stop Wesker, as he's the only one who can, bothers me a lot. I think they could have still had Jill stay behind after the next part of the game or right up until the end, because if I was mind controlled by a man I hate, I would be wanting some revenge. So long, bodysuit Jill. See you in the next game. I think I've written something like this for like 5 videos now. It started as a joke, but it's actually insane how much Capcom likes a ship as a set piece. Someone tell me down below how many times ships are used in the Resident Evil series. I bet it's something crazy, or maybe it's just one of those things you notice and you can't unnotice. This part is fine, I guess. It's more of the same factory stuff we were just doing, just spread out. So it goes, first section is regular guys, then back to machine gun guys, and then topped off with a super version of the minigun guy. I can't stand this man. For one, I was super low on ammo and healing, and second, he just doesn't get stunned and shoots forever. You can't run from this fight either since he's a keycard you need, but enough of that. The game is about to end, so we need a flashback from our villain.
A new superior breed of humans, given birth by the progenitor virus. The Wesker children were entrusted with endless potential. Of them, only one survived. You.
Are you my daddy?
Ha! Wesker has daddy issues. For all the shit I just talked about boats, they kind of make a good use of it here. Kind of. A while back, Excella had a conversation with Wesker, basically saying how she wants to be with him as partners. Well, Wesker, as we know, is a cruel man, and Ouroboros, as Excella was explaining it back in the labs, kind of works like the flower. If your body is quote-unquote chosen, you'll become a god. Well, I do like the scene setup of all these bodies here. Like I said, there's some solid horror assets. Excella's been hit by Rita Orta, you know, monster girl thing, and she's too big for one man to handle, so run. And that's what we do for most of the section, running around dodging her tentacles, getting glimpses of just how huge she is until we arrive at the captain's deck. Right? That's what it's called? There's some instructions here for a weapon that sounds extremely familiar, but it couldn't be, right? On the roof is where we'll be dealing with Excella, or just the blob. I don't know if she's still in there. And this fight gives me strong Dead Space vibes, down to shooting the pus-looking balls. Except when you pop those, her weak spot is exposed where we can hammer down this beam of light. With Excella down, the only thing left is Wesker. Jill calls in and basically says, hey, we can overdose this guy. Wow, that's a crazy thing to say. Remember how a few minutes ago I said this? We haven't reached the pinnacle though, but we are close. Well, congratulations, we've made it to by far the worst section of the game. IMO. You have these doors, but they take forever to open, and in the meantime, you are swarmed with enemies from every angle. You have the bug guys, machine gun guys, stun guys, the whole 9 yards. But if that wasn't enough for you, at the end they spawn in 2 minigun guys who are a pain in the ass. Normally, you would just separate these 2 and deal with them one by one, but I went for some style points. I know that it has seemed difficult, but playing this on higher difficulties with someone, I was here for about an hour. I blame them. We finally catch up to Wesker and God, this guy is so cool.
You've really become quite an inconvenience for me.
This is the fight I mentioned earlier when I said they did at least one of the Wesker fights pretty good. It also makes good use of co-op. With the knowledge that we can overdose this guy, we need to create an opportunity to inject him. Dim the lights down low and hit him with a rocket launcher, but Wesker is way too cool for a single rocket. Matter of fact, he just catches it. So we gotta shoot him to daze him and then restrain him so our partner can inject him. But the timing is tight. Even if you're mashing that button down, he'll quickly throw you off. You really gotta have the timing down with your partner, making this a pretty solid fight in that regard. Wesker starts feeling it a little bit, and I think for the first time seeing him lose his cool and be upset. There's a quick chase and some more confrontation where they stick this man again. Damn. In an effort to stop Wesker, they open up the hatch and start flying out. Chris obviously has a good grip, but Sheva. Poor Sheva. This is where she dies. Wesker gets a hand on her and it's too much. Both flying into the abyss or volcano, leaving Chris to watch another partner fall because of Wesker.
My name is Sheva Alama. That's why I'm your partner.
I'm going with you. I can't just turn my back and walk away. We are partners. To the end.
So long, partner.
Nah, just kidding. Wesker does fly out though, and we crash, bringing us to the final fight of the game. The highly controversial Wesker fight. The choice is good though. Final destination, Fox only, solid. Wesker, being pissed off, finally decides to take matters into his own hands, literally, and inject himself with Ouroboros, like all of it. Then it's time to run, and this whole part is basically on rails. You can't really damage him here, and it's all about reuniting with Sheva. First, you guys run off separately where Sheva covers you, then Wesker hops over and you cover Sheva. You also punch a rock, and I know everyone loves that part, but I told you, I had the QTE stuff turned off, but it was weird. Like, some stuff I still had to press, but sometimes I didn't, and here it was just, I don't know, it's something. When you guys finally reunite, it's now time for the final fight, which is a sore letdown. Wesker should have gotten something more epic. This just feels bad. Wesker has 2 weak spots, one on his chest and one on his back. The chest is the main one, so fight goes like this. Wesker charges his super, you hit him in the back, he uses a defensive move, and then you damage his front. Just repeat until you win, but Wesker feels so robotic. Like, you can just stand there and the guy does nothing. He feels less OP than before, and I guess it makes sense, right? He's technically unstable, he's been injected twice, and also taking Ouroboros, which we know is some strong stuff. At the very least, the final blow is well done. The side characters show back up in a helicopter randomly, don't worry, they'll explain how in just a bit, but before the DLC came out, it definitely was random. Wesker still tries to hold on, and in tradition he gets blown up by a rocket launcher. Chris reflects on the words he said in the opening.
More and more I find myself wondering if it's all worth fighting for. For a future without fear? Yeah, it's worth it.
And curtain call. This bothers me on so many levels. If it was just any other RE game, fine, solid ending. But it's Wesker. It's Chris. Give me something more. Give me an after credit scene with an update on everyone's lives. Or show me a relief Chris. I know technically there's more bioterrorists and shit, but he just brought down the main guy. This is such a weak ending for what feels like an end of an era. It's just like, yeah, he's dead now. On top of it, the ending theme is just the intro theme, which it's a good song, but this doesn't feel very heroic or happy or like, yeah, we just beat Wesker. That's the end of Resident Evil 5, but it's not the end of the game. Oh boy. RE5 was born in the era where every game had to have some kind of online multiplayer mode. Dead Space famously had the versus mode tacked on, but lucky for Capcom, they already had something solid. Mercenaries. So Mercenaries returns, and this is where it hit its stride, having both a local and online mode made for fun for a lot of you, I'm sure. Me personally, I've always been more of a co-op story driven guy, and never really played this that much. But I did play a few rounds and found it enjoyable, but Mercenaries Reunion, that's some good stuff. It's the same as regular Mercenaries, but you're more OP. Everyone has at least one fun gun. Chris gets the minigun and this 3-barrel shotgun that when he shoots, he does so one-handed, which is just cool. Barry's here, Rebecca, Josh, and a bunch of other characters you can unlock. Mercenaries had to be extremely popular because it even spun off into its own game, which I probably won't ever cover because it's just more Mercenaries, I'm pretty sure. But it will be a talking point in the next RE video. Spoilers. There's one more game mode here called Versus, which has its own game modes, but I couldn't find anyone to play with, so I have no footage. If you have any experience though, feel free to share because it does sound pretty cool. There's only one more thing to talk about, and that's the DLC. Besides being the era of online multiplayer, DLC was creeping up slowly. It's not like it is today, where sometimes the DLC feels like its own game. Here it was mostly bite-sized stuff, usually about an hour or so worth of content. Resident Evil 5 got lucky and had two, Lost in Nightmares and Desperate Escape, with the focal point of each being Jill, hence why she replaces Sheva on the cover. Lost in Nightmares is the same story Chris tells Sheva, except we actually play it out, and it's just one big love letter to RE fans. Or maybe an apology. This game is so close to doing something so good, but it just can't. Here we investigate a spooky mansion, which is just the RE1 mansion, but in a new engine, and I'm always for this. No matter how many times you guys want to do this, I will be there. They even changed the way the doors open for the first section. It quickly goes first person and kind of works. This made me a little uneasy, waiting for a jump scare to happen and anticipating it every time I moved further into the mansion, and it never came. The very first part of the mansion is old school RE, but like if someone new made it, so I guess not like old school RE. You run around the mansion to collect 3 passwords so you can open up a secret door to get a crank. I do want to make a note here though, that one of the passwords is technically hidden behind fire, requiring you to light the paper via the fireplace to get the password. I think it's a missed opportunity where they could have brought the lighter back because, you know, everyone loves the lighter, right? They do bring back shields though, even grabbing one to unlock a door, it's cute. There's also a way to turn your view to fix camera angles, and that's nice. Everything is fine until you go into the basement. The entire time, the basement is built up to be this torture chamber that houses creatures, and to be fair, it does look the part, but the enemies are not it. And the way they're introduced is also pretty comical. I was running around, got a sound cue, and was so confused about what I was supposed to be afraid of. I think when you hit the corner here, you're supposed to see it walk down the hallway or something. I didn't though. Sorry. They are pretty tough though, and more of a nuisance to deal with, so I just ran. Eventually another one will show up, and the chase factor is okay. Sure, they do a lot of damage, but they're just not scary, and they kind of feel out of place. I do like that our weapons get taken away. That's cool, I like that. And the puzzle in the sewer area is solid co-op gameplay. Having one turn the handle as the other lures the creature in to smash like a bug, and collecting the 3 pieces each one drops. It's fine, even if it does feel a bit like padding time. Then we reach the top, pick up some guns, and deal with Wesker. Again, they have zero clue how to create an interesting fight with this guy, and now they're even more restrained because we know what happens here. For this fight, you just dodge or try to dodge with the button prompts and then hit him. Yep, that's it. That's the fight. Things play out the same and the DLC ends. I like the results screen here though, showing Chris. It pulls on the heartstring a little. Ironically, I think the best thing about this DLC is the Butler story. See, the entire time you're picking up memos the Butler left, and each one is nostalgic and grows more and more sad. Well, as sad as you can be for someone who works for Spencer. Talking about growing up here, becoming next in line to serve Spencer, even talking about all the old heads like that one guy from Zero. Marcus? I don't know. To eventually the Butler being told to leave and let Wesker know where Spencer is, but not directly, indirectly. Lost Nightmares is a cute hour of RE callbacks, but it's basically fluff. Desperate Escape, on the other hand, is all action and a banger. This DLC focuses on Jill and Josh and basically covers their side of the story. How Jill got to the communication room and how they got a helicopter. Josh is still the GOAT even if he doesn't want to move, and Jill is in a bodysuit that made everyone feral. Most of this is running through quick little action segments, throwing a lot of enemies at you, and tough ones. This guy even makes a comeback, which is so odd seeing. He just doesn't even look like any of these guys' friends. The last part of the DLC is so good though. Actually good. It's basically a mini Mercenaries, waiting out the timer for the helicopter, which gives Left 4 Dead vibes and hits. Music is great, being low on ammo is an adrenaline rush, especially when tough enemy after tough enemy keeps coming out. They even do a fake out, which is just chef's kiss. Seeing the number get close to 0 and boom, 2 more minutes. Sadly though, we get introduced to Doug and we know he isn't in the ending.
Come on! We are clear!
You don't have to tell me twice!
The true hero of RE5, RIP Doug. That's about everything I could possibly cover about Resident Evil 5. So let's talk about a remake.
Come on!
You are asking for too much.
Resident Evil 5 is the only game, well maybe 6 too, but the only game where I feel people wouldn't mind if they added a whole bunch of new things. I don't think anyone is like, yeah, I want to see Irving again. I think Capcom is free to do with 5 whatever they want to do. Only thing they really have to keep is Chris, Sheva, Wesker, and Jill. And probably the backdrop of Africa, but they might change that because they had some controversy the first time, but who knows. Well, here comes random YouTube guy's idea for a remake since we all love those. My idea is simple. Stay with me. Make it open world. Now I know that sounds like shit, but not fully, just partially. I do it like this. First chapter of this game plays out the same, but when you regroup with Josh's team is when you would go open world. And you would use the collect 3 things thing you guys love so much. But you know that place we fight the giant? Well, I would use that as a base you return to, and then have Chris and Sheva use the car to drive around the savannah, actually making them be BSA agents, looking for clues for Irving if he survived the draft. That way there's some camaraderie there, so when you return to the final time and everything has gone to shit, you feel something. And also worried about Josh, because, you know, he's the GOAT. That way when he returns later, we're like, whew, glad you made it. Also, give Wesker more screen time. It's his game as much as it is Chris's. I think the bigger question is if you keep co-op, which I think they should, but, you know, also try to make it a better experience for solo players, because we all deserve it. If you guys got any ideas, leave them down below. When I think of Resident Evil 5, I really do think of it as a good game, but also a bad game, and sometimes really bad. But the thing I think about most is potential. I think this game had the potential to be a very satisfying game. They obviously did it with RE4, and as we know with future titles, even if they stumble sometimes, and we're getting closer to that one, everyone has different problems with this game, whether it's ruining Chris or too actiony, but my problem is direction, which is a new one for me. See, the reason why I think that is because nothing feels dedicated. Nothing gets time to sit here, it's always move, 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 but not in a good pacing kind of way. The best way to describe it is if you hired a tour guide at an amusement park and they're behind schedule, constantly getting you to new attractions before you can even enjoy yourself. Everything is go now, which doesn't help that every chapter of this game feels like a mission or a new stage. Nothing feels connected. Comparing it to RE4, which had chapters as well, but it all felt connected. Even when a chapter ended, sometimes you can turn around and go right back. Or you would return at a later chapter and now it's a new time or something changed. For 5, it's all new and it feels like they're trying to show off how shiny it is, but that's all it is. It's surface level. We have these cool areas, but there's not much to explore or the areas don't have depth. Compared to the village in RE4 or the castle, which all feel like distinct areas with its own set of people who live there. While everyone here just kind of jumps out, the closest this game gets to that feeling is the beginning. Those first handful of chapters are pretty solid. Sure, it still feels extremely linear in that we can only go one way, but it feels like, I don't know, like it has some kick to it. On top of that, RE4 rode a very thin line between horror and action. It did fall off that line at the end, regenerators aside, but it did a solid job. Here it's like they tried but kept leaning towards action, but then throwing back some horror like, oh, we are a horror game, see, spooky. So if the direction stuck to one thing, another horror action solo game or full-on action co-op game, I think it would fare better. But Capcom couldn't alienate the fan base, so it was better to lie to them and be like, yeah, there's some horror here. You also add in co-op, which is fine, it's good if you have someone to play with, but I know a lot of people who only play single player games. And to be fair, RE was and kind of still is single player focused. So when someone who plays single player games plays this game, it's not a good time. It feels like you're missing out on the core gameplay, and sure, local is really cool to have, but sometimes people just don't have people, and that's fine, it happens. But when it's a mainline entry and not a spin-off, it kind of hurts. Then you break down the plot itself and how this game is supposed to be about Wesker, Jill, and Chris, and realize it's kind of about none of them. Wesker doesn't take center stage until chapter 5-3. He gets chapter 6 to himself, and that's it. Sure, there's sprinkles of him here and there, but that's less than a quarter of the game. That's crazy. Jill gets more screen time technically, but she's still underutilized and feels like leftovers. Chris isn't done too bad like those two, where Chris actually has a solid backstory and character development here, but it's very surface level. They have a strong starting point here, with Chris having PTSD and struggling to wonder if this is worth it. They could have leaned in harder to that aspect, but it's not important, at least to the game's eyes. He does come around to accepting Sheva as a partner, but he never really felt opposed to it in the first place. But I like the dynamic between the two, and that it came off as friends and not anything romantic. Good job. I think I talked long enough, so with all that said, I love this game. Truly, it's created some of my favorite moments in gaming. I'll always remember seeing this scene with a certain man's I Believe I Can Fly and thinking it was the funniest thing ever. Or just sitting there and spamming B at the door because my friend was doing something and I wanted to annoy them with hurry, Sheva, hurry, Sheva. I played this game again for the first time in years in 2022 with my brother and for the first time on Veteran. You guys who beat it on Professional are nasty. That was also around the time I decided to start making YouTube videos on the series. So I owe it to RE5, and I had a very hard time thinking of how to tackle this video, which is why it took so long to make. So I hope you enjoyed it, and you know, you had a good time. Alright, I'm done yapping. I'll catch you guys around the next video. Take it easy.
Wesker. So you've come. Chris, you make me proud. But of course you are one of my men.
Thanks.